You are watching Channel Africa Conversations.
The problem is not on the law. At least 80% of electoral actors do not know the law at all, because it has been approved 90 days before election. So people are not familiarized with it.
Hello and welcome to the Channel Africa podcast, Channel Africa Conversations. I'm Peter Ndoro. Today's edition is on the Mozambique elections, an event that could shape one of Africa's most resource nations. The political tensions in the country, economic challenges and security concerns are in the spotlight. And the question is, what's at stake for Mozambique? Well, joining me in studio is Mr. Kwezi Mngqibisa, who's a leading voice on African diplomacy. Thank you for joining us. I look forward to our conversation on this country and this turning point in their situation. And we're also joined by Mr. Raposo, who's in Maputo. He's a local and a leading voice in diplomacy and politics in the country. He'll be helping us unpack the situation in his country. This is a conversation you don't want to miss. Stay with us. Right, so we begin in Mozambique, Maputo. This is a country that is going to the elections. And there seems to be a lot at stake at this particular election. And to unpack this for us is somebody who knows the country well and is a leading voice, a respected voice in terms of the political landscape there. We talk now to Egidio G. Vas Raposo. Thanks very much indeed for joining us and welcome.
Thank you very much for having me.
Before we unpack the issues on the ground, what is the situation in the country? How are people feeling ahead of these elections?
Well, first of all, from economic perspective, this country has gone through serious hardship since 2015 with the famously known as hidden debt. And now in 2024, the campaign is rather weak in terms of economic perspective, the power purchasing of people, as well as even political parties also are heavily affected in their capacity actually to finance the campaigns. And this is for all 37 political parties. So you can't see more posters, for example. Campaign materials are rather scarce. In terms of, for example, the four key candidates who are running for president, also we are 8 days, for example, ahead of the elections, ahead of the end of the campaign, and nobody has made at least 90% of 157 districts. So it's just a snapshot to make the case that, okay, from economic perspective, political candidates as well as the political parties are facing the serious challenges to move throughout the country due to these hardships. The electoral bodies also do have some sort of support to these political parties, but their contribution is far from ideal and even do not cover at least 1/3 of key needs. And to my concern is that we are going to witness a more divided opposition, partly because of the history of confusion and crisis that these key opposition parties have in the last 3 years. So there have been like power struggle within Frelimo, which is the opposition party, as well as within MDM. As you know, one of the presidential candidates was previously a prominent member of Frelimo. Previous to that, he was also a member of MDM, which is the third largest party. This year, in June, there was huge power struggle within Renamo, where at least 6 candidates contested for the presidency of this party. So what I fear the most is the voter turnout, because every time the voter turnout was below 50, it benefits the ruling party, the party in power, definitely.
All right.
So the only condition, for example, to have a power shift or at least power balance is to have at least up 20% of voter turnout.
All right. So, Egidio, what you're saying then is the opposition may be a victim of their own divisions. Had they found a way to work together, there may have been opportunity to oust the governing party. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, not necessarily ousting the ruling party, but at least to have a very good outcome in these elections.
So what
if you go to the street and hear what people are expecting, for example, from the current opposition parties, they are very skeptical. But they are very enthusiastic, for example, in supporting a presidential candidate who is known by the name of Venancio Mondlane, who have actually defected from Renamo, for example. If you think from that perspective, you can think of a very either divided electorate or an electorate that is not actually expecting to give its vote for example, the current opposition leader because of that division.
Let me ask you this. Most of us who think about Mozambique will probably think of 1975 and Samora Machel and that kind of promise and hope. How much has the political landscape changed, particularly in the last maybe decade, to get to where we are now in your country?
Well, Mozambique is not unlike other countries. We as the region are actually experiencing the same challenges from economic to political turmoil. And even Frelimo in Mozambique is only surviving thanks to the division of the opposition itself, the power struggles, and the way it is structured. From time to time, people are defecting from one party to another, and you can't have a core opposition that is focused actually to oust the ruling party. So, in terms of priorities, a common Mozambican would think first of security, and this is one of the great achievements of President Nyusi, who struck peace agreement with Renamo, and this is the very first time that there are elections in Mozambique where no political party is armed. But there is a problem, though. Terrorism in the north is actually consuming large parts of the state budget. So we are in a virtual war economy where priority actually is security. So even if you try to think about the parties or the current government's performance, many has been left aside to prioritize security concerns. So if the opposition was actually well organized, this was the time where actually it could house the current ruling party.
Egidio, do you think that these elections are going to be free and fair and a true reflection of the will of the people?
Well, this is a very, very complicated question because it also depends on organization, the capacity for the state to actually run it smoothly. And for now, I can tell you that the electoral bodies are running a deficit budget. So, first thing we are going to have is the delays in making available electoral equipment and deployment of electoral bodies and equipment throughout the country. The second thing we are going to have is the capacity for civil society as well as international observers to crisscross the country for budgetary constraints as well. So we will only rely on electoral bodies who will tell us the numbers, the figures. Even if the international observers come and say, I don't think that will be representative of the reality. I can give you small numbers. European Union has only 75 international observers in Mozambique. So political parties are also entitled to have their electoral observers and civil society as well. And this country is running six economic issues that will not make it possible for us to reflect and comment on outcome of elections and regard and reflect the reality. So we have bias. I can tell you that whether they will be free or fair, but as for today, the electoral bodies are actually carrying out their plan as planned, and everything is on time. But the problem is not there. The problem is the electoral night, from the electoral night onward. The electoral law has been revised to reflect opposition parties' concerns and international observers' concerns too, with regard to access to the ballot boxes, counting, vote counting, tabulation, and etc. That makes it very difficult, for example, for irregularities like vote stuffing, for example, or even exchange of entire ballot boxes and stuff like that. The political society in Mozambique agrees and understand that this law is better and might contribute to free and fair elections. But the problem is not on the law. At least 80% of electoral actors, like party candidates and party candidates and their representatives, do not know the law at all, because it has been approved 90 days before election. So people are not familiarized with it.
Egidio, I'm going to have to stop our conversation there because of time, but I think you've given us some really good insights about the situation in the country. Let's hope the elections do go well and that the will of the people is heard. Thank you so much indeed. Muito obrigado. Adeus.
Muito obrigado.
Thank you so much. We continue unpacking the Mozambique election story, and joining me in studio now is Mr. Kwezi Mngqibisa, who is a political analyst. The Pan-African politics is something that he understands well. Kwezi, thanks very much indeed for joining us.
Greetings, Peter, and thanks for the privilege.
I'm going to start with a question I asked our previous guest, and it's about the outcome of the elections. As one that understands the region quite well and politics in general across the continent, where do you rate Mozambique's democracy and its ability to produce a fair result?
Well, it's a mixed bag of various thresholds in various areas of concern. The starting point will have to be on governance. is the political system, when it executes its obligations and responsibilities, trusted by those that it's supposed to be regulating interests for in society? There's a big question mark when it comes to Mozambique at this point in time. As indicated by Mr. Raposo in your intro, there's been a lot of confidence-related question marks around how the ruling party has engaged with the opposition, how the government broadly has prioritized, amongst other things, out of necessity, security. But perhaps more importantly, how this prioritization of security has had an impact on addressing economic or the provision of economic and social goods in society. From that point of view, I think Mozambique is going to have to scrape through with a very low threshold on whether the governance system will be in a position to say that we are happy to have delivered an election that reflects truly the will of the people. The last elections are an indicator. Only 50% of the electorate turned out to the polls. And as many of us have come to understand and accept, a lower turnout tends to be beneficial to the incumbents, as it were. The second one, which I think is important, is that if you look into the outcome, or rather into the campaigns as they are being run at this point in time, very few of them address fundamental development, poverty alleviation issues. Indeed, some of the manifestos make reference to development, creating employment. But the reality of the matter is that the country has been fixated since 2017 and beyond with how to fight the extremist threat in the north of the country. This has had an impact upon bringing in international investors. This has also had an impact, or has been impacted upon, by missteps, for example, around corruption. So what we're looking at is that the political class broadly can be considered not to be at the best moment to deliver an outcome that many Mozambicans would consider as one that they can be proud of, or one that can inspire confidence in whatever the outcome of who is declared the winner or not.
I saw a political analyst recently saying that Gaza might decide the American election. Cabo Delgado, is it a big enough issue to determine the outcome of this election? Because the president has been tried and tested in terms of keeping the country secure. Do the people feel more secure? Do they believe that he can secure them? Or are they saying, we need somebody else?
Yes and no. That's, I think, the extent of the complexity of the question and the realities on the ground. Yes, in this sense. Cabo Delgado is very important. The liquefied natural gas deposits are actually found off the coast of Pemba, which is where this insurgency emanates from or operates out of. What is interesting, Peter, is that also for Mamodi, the opposition leader of Renamo, actually carried through the hand and gestures of friendship and finding a solution to the conflict between Renamo and Frelimo by signing the agreements in 2019 that actually brought into the fold Renamo, which had been a long thorn on the side of Frelimo. Now, this is positive in that it basically snuffs out the impression in the broader population that local grievances are being ignored by Maputo, or by extension by Frelimo. Now, this is a positive thing, because what the current contesting parties are saying about Cabo Delgado is something similar to what Renamo and Frelimo did, that we're willing to listen to the grievances of locals, or the grievances that breed and create an environment for the insurgency to take root, as it is seen in Cabo Delgado in the province of Pemba. So yes, Cabo Delgado will be an important factor. But at the same time, it might not be much of a factor, because if you look into what has happened in the last couple of months with the deployment and conclusion of the mission of the Southern African Development Community, the presence of the Rwandese armed forces to deal directly with the insurgency, that situation is no longer, I think, the most topical issue that one could bring to the table as a definer of the politics and the security situation in the country. So no, it might not be. So we might have to revert back to the realities of, are there public social goods? Is there a response to unemployment? Is there a response to corruption? Is there a response to a myriad of many other challenges? So Cabo Delgado might not be that much of a pressing issue for some of the people that have to participate in these elections.
Who are the real players in this election? For years, Frelimo, Renamo, are there new players that have a significant influence, or is it a movie that we've watched before?
It is, in part, the movie that we've seen before. I mean, it might be a little bit disappointing, if not discouraging, for democracy observers or multi-party democracy observers. But the reality of the matter is that after the 2014 elections, there's been a reversal of opposition party gains, of multi-party gains in Mozambique. I mean, if you look into the outcomes of the major political parties that contested those elections, in 2019, almost all of the opponents of Frelimo actually lost, or at least reduced their numbers of representation in parliament. They reduced the percentages with which their candidates for the presidency actually scored. And it is only Frelimo that actually increased. With that being said, of the older, long-standing actors in that country, but there is this relatively younger, newer politician, Venancio Mondlane, as indicated, I think, by the analyst from Mozambique. He has got a very interesting political story to tell, having come from MDM, moved to Renamo. Right now, he has actually established his own political party, Democratic Alliance Coalition, which unfortunately had been excluded by the Constitutional Council from participating, hence is running as an independent. What he represents for me, looking in from outside, is a reality that many of us have seen play itself out when it comes to assessing the longevity and relevance of liberation movements. Is that at some stage there is a disjuncture, a disconnect between social capital or social forces with the political ideology and the role of that ideology in governance. And what this opposition leader or independent seems to communicate is the fact that people are looking for a measure of changed politics. And that changed politics might not be a widespread phenomenon across the electorate, but we are talking of the continent has got a younger population. Younger people appear to be more responsive to younger politicians, especially those younger politicians that speak to issues that young people are concerned about. And I think that this is what needs to actually be looked at anew when we're looking at assessing the performance of the various parties. Final point on my side on this very same question. Daniel Chapo, the candidate of the ruling Frelimo party, is a born-free, Peter. Now, what this means, and it does not mean that it was given to him because he's a born-free, but I mean, it's actually a continuation of a trend that we've seen even within the ruling party, whereby President Nyusi was the first president of Mozambique who did not go to the liberation war, which basically means that although the party is besieged with a number of challenges, but they've got their eye, and at least their finger on the pulse of how are the candidates and leaders that were putting out there to be voted for by the public perceived insofar as they are relatable to that public. So I'm not saying that this will be a determining factor, but I think for us observing the transition and change in society, it's a worthwhile big point. Young people are beginning to actually make their choices. They might not be politically active, they might not be active in the party structures, but they actually are putting themselves out there to give a voice.
As journalists, we often like to catch on to certain words and phrases like reshaping Mozambique's future. Regardless of the outcome, will Mozambique be different after this, particularly when you start to think about the dynamics of the region and what's happened in other countries?
I think I should thank you to start off with, Peter, by not asking me what the outcome might be, because perhaps I should address myself to that so that I can give context in answering your question. I think that with everything as is at this point in time, chances are that the ruling party will do pretty well. The internal congress of the party that actually nominated Chapo had to process a lot of internal democracy challenges and issues around what do they consider to be an appropriate candidate who will be attractive to the electorate. That being as is, there is no turning back for Mozambique changing. When I say no turning back, there is none of the countries in our region, Southern Africa at this point in time, are being changed by the choices only of the ruling party, whether they are a liberation party or not. The reality of the matter is that there appears to be more pressures from society at large that actually compels, or at least forces or obligates, the ruling parties, the governing parties, whatever they call themselves, to wish to put out a compelling story to account for themselves as a choice for the people. Now, we have seen a number of developments which I think might actually pan out in Mozambique as well, whereby the role of the private sector becomes more pronounced. It might not be always progressive or helpful for democracy, but it is actually making a stand. The role of international actors is also coming out. If you look into Mozambique, the country's history is filled with stories of how the Catholic Church played a very constructive role at times in order to end the civil war, and continues to actually mobilize not just young people but mobilize civil society broadly to actually make voluble their voices. And I think that these are practices at this point in time we have not seen taking root, but we are seeing being communicated and being postured to say that this is the type of society we wish to see beyond just election night.
Kwezi, I wish we could talk for longer. There's so much to unpack with the Mozambique elections, but your thoughts and your insights greatly appreciated on the podcast today.
Thank you for having me, Peter.
Thank you so much. And that's Channel Africa Conversations for today. Thanks very much indeed for joining us. And we look forward to having you join us for the next one. In the meantime, please don't forget to connect with us on our social media platforms, and they're on your screen now. We'd love to hear from you, comments, share your thoughts, and maybe even suggest future conversations. From me and the team, take care. We'll see you next time.
You are watching Channel Africa Conversations.